Hey, Eric.
Hey, Julie, and hello, Maybe God listeners. We're back with the conclusion of our second season, and we're going to be releasing episodes every other week from now until the Christmas break. And we're super excited to tell you about a new little project that I've been working on, my first book that's being released in early December, December the 4th. It's really been, a labor of love over the past 2 years, and I'm really excited to have it out.
It's an awesome book, Eric. I just read it this week. It's called 40 Days of Doubt. And I think people who have been sort of grappling with some of the topics that we've been bringing up on this podcast are especially going to love to dig deeper into your messages in this book. It was actually really funny when we were recording an interview, a very emotional interview last week for Maybe God. And the FedEx guy shows up with a delivery, and it's your very first copy of the book. And so it was super cool to watch you open it and hold it for the first time. Does it feel real yet?
It does now. It's starting to. It's overwhelming. It's hard to explain. The book world is just a weird world, and there's so much more that goes into it than you think. There's so much time. And so when you finally get the copy of the book, the hard copy in your hands, it's a special feeling. And, you know, with this project, it's not going to really make us any money or anything. It's just such an issue that's so close to my heart. I really want more than anything else for people that are kind of walk the same journey that I'm walking to try and make sense of it a little bit. This journey from more secular humanism to faith in something bigger, to some kind of transcendent faith. So that's why I wrote the book, 40 Days of Doubt.
It's awesome. I can't wait for everyone to read it.
Thank you, Julie. So just before the book is released on December 4th, we're going to give Maybe God listeners a special preview of what's inside the book, 40 Days of Doubt, Devotions for the Skeptic. So I hope our listeners will stay tuned for that. And until then, Julie, what's happening today?
So today's pretty exciting too. We've got some really cool news to share with everyone. We're launching a new format. It's called Maybe God Live. And Eric, don't worry, we're still going to have a full dose of awesome, highly produced episodes each season.
Great.
But just a few times a year, we'll have a live event, mostly here at the Story Houston, with some really, really special guests that are just too good to keep to ourselves in this small cave-like recording studio.
So we recorded our very first Maybe God live event here at the Story, and I really couldn't believe it. Over 300 people showed up. Whoa, good evening. The surprise on my face is this is not our typical 5 p.m. crowd, but I'm so thrilled to see all of you. And well, if all it takes was Dr. Tour being here at 5 p.m. to get all of you come at 5 p.m., then we'd love to have you back sometime. So people here are still talking about that event. Welcome. It was an incredible night where everybody's assumptions were shaken. Everybody's cages was rattled. And I just want to give a little word of caution to our listeners that some of these Maybe God live events are going to feel a little different and a little more challenging to everyone, I think, because we're digging into some at times controversial topics and issues, and instead of coming at them from multiple perspectives like we would in a regular episode of Maybe God, where we kind of put a bow on it at the end, we don't have that benefit with a live event. There's no script, and I think that's especially the case in this first live event, where we're talking about a pretty hot button issue where everybody's pretty much, I'd say, dug in on one side or the other. And in this case, we're only going to hear one side, one perspective. And it's a very strong perspective, a very well-informed one, but at times loud and and maybe heavy-handed. And I'll be completely transparent with you. I just wrote a chapter in the book, 40 Days of Doubt, about the topic we're going to be talking about in this live event. And what I wrote did not line up with what this guest had to say. And I'm not sure I would have agreed with him. But he's very convincing. He's very compelling. He knows way more about this subject than I ever did. But he really made me stop and think, why do we believe what we believe on any issue? Why do I believe what I believe about this issue? Have I really done the homework? Have I researched this enough on my own to make an informed decision? I talk a lot at the Story and here on Maybe God about seeking the truth, but have I done that in this case, or have I just taken what others have told me and regurgitated it?
You talked about everyone feeling very challenged in their views here. It sounds like maybe you were one of the most challenged.
Oh, I was. You know, here's the deal. Like, if enough seemingly intelligent people say the same thing for long enough, everyone starts to believe it. And what our guest today is going to say is that's no reason to believe anything. And that a lot of, really smart people have universally agreed on things in the past that have turned out to be dead wrong as more evidence has presented itself. And so that's what he's saying is happening now. And I think our minds should be open to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always assumed that criticism of this particular issue only came from the religious right. So it was pretty wild for me too. So here's the deal. We created this podcast to be a two-way conversation, but we're asking listeners to engage now more than ever, especially through these events. Even if you can't be in Houston, we need you to tell us what you're thinking. And I really think with good open dialogue, we're going to build a stronger community of believers and skeptics who want to seek truth together. And that's what the Story Houston is about, and that's what this podcast is about. So after you listen today, you might be screaming at your car radio, but please email us right away. Our email address is maybegodpod@gmail.com. That's maybegodpod@gmail.com. So let us know what you think. And we promise we'll follow up before the end of the season with another episode on the E word. And we'll bring in more experts to help us flesh this out.
All right. So, Julie, I think with all this build-up, it's finally time to introduce our very first Maybe God Live guest.
It is. But why don't we let him introduce himself?
All right.
I got my PhD in the field of organic chemistry, postdoc at Stanford University. Joined the group of a man who was going to win a Nobel Prize in chemistry. Voted one of the top 50 most influential minds in the world. I was a visiting scholar at Harvard University. I've spoken at every major university in this country, have over 650 research publications, voted the R&D magazine Scientist of the Year. I'm in the National Academy of Inventors. I'm a member of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, over 120 patents. Started 7 or 8 companies. We work in areas that range from medicine to materials science to electronics, computer memory, medical devices. We work across a broad range of areas. But more than any of that, what means the most to me is that I'm a Jew who believes that Jesus is the Messiah.
On this episode of Maybe God Live, Rice University's Dr. James Torr speaking to a full house at the Story Houston.
Welcome, Dr. Torr. This is our first time meeting, but I've heard your name spoken from many different trusted sources and mutual friends, and I'm so grateful that you're here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could you just maybe tell us, in the simplest, most layman terms possible, what is it that you do in the field of science?
So we work across many different fields. There was a man named Bezalel who Moses had commissioned to build the tabernacle. And it's as God endowed him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom and knowledge, and the ability to work in gold and silver and bronze and wood and carvings and fabrics across every field necessary, and to teach it. This is a blessing of God, so it's nothing inherent within me. I was never a particularly strong student until I got to college. So whatever there is, it's because of what Jesus has done, So I pray the prayer each day that, Lord, make me like Bezalel. And he does. Go figure. God answers prayer. We have several drug candidates and medical devices, materials, carbon materials from graphene, fullerenes, carbon nanotubes. We worked in all of those areas.
That is awesome. I'm used to hearing speech like that from preachers like me. I'm not as accustomed to hearing speech like that from world-renowned scientists. How does a Jewish boy raised in New York on the path toward becoming who you are today, a renowned scientist, become an evangelical Christian?
So I understand where you're coming from. You're much taller than me. Can I stand up? Because there's people
Please.
over there, they can't even see me. There's this voice. They can't even see me. Now they can at least see me.
Go for it. This is your floor.
All right.
Do it.
So Jews have we're generally shorter. You don't.
You can say that, I can't.
You don't. You don't find us on pro football teams on the field, but we're in the owners' boxes.
Again, you can say that, I can't.
So Paul never called himself a Christian. Christians is what other people referred to them as. And he even, when he made a defense for his life, he says, I'm a Hebrew of Hebrews. I'm of the tribe of Benjamin. And so we Messianic Jews don't generally go around calling ourselves Christian. Other people call us this, and I'm okay with that because I understand what you mean. But unlike other religions, we don't give up Judaism to become Christians. All the apostles were Jews, and none of them ever claimed to be Christians. We call it teshuvah, return to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to what we were supposed to be doing, to the remnant. And so for me, it was a very natural thing. But I didn't have that much sophistication. I got saved because Jesus Christ touched my life. And I was 18 years old in college, and a young man from Navigators Campus Ministry told me he wanted to give me a presentation of the gospel. And he had me read the first verse from the Bible that I read, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And I told him, I'm not a sinner. I've never robbed a bank. I've never killed anyone. And in modern secular Judaism, we don't think about sin. We don't talk about it very much. Christians worry about every little thing if it's a sin. We don't. We're good. We go to the synagogue once a year, and the rabbi says a few things, and we're set for another year. So then he had me read another verse, and Jesus said, if you look upon a woman to lust after her, you've committed adultery with her already in your heart. And that really hit me. And the reason it really hit me is because I was 18 years old, and from the age of 14, I had been addicted to pornography. And there was no internet in those days. It was magazines, and I worked in a gas station just outside of New York City, and I'd clean the parking lots, and I'd get these magazines from the trash cans that the salesman would throw out on Friday nights on their way home. I became addicted at a young age, and I didn't think anybody knew. And a man from 2,000 years ago called me out on that, and it really shook me. And I said, if that's the definition of sin, then I'm a sinner. And I couldn't get that off my mind. That was in August, end of August, my freshman year. And November 7th, 1977, I was all alone in my room, and I got on my knees, and I'm not sure why I did that. Christians I knew sit when they pray. Jews stand when they pray. And I got on my knees and I said, Lord, forgive me because I am a sinner. Forgive me. And I felt this amazing sense of peace come over me that I'd never known before. And all of a sudden, Jesus was standing in my room. And I opened my eyes and who's standing in my room? And I couldn't see him, but he was right there. And I just sensed this amazing love and kindness, and I didn't want to get up. And my life changed that day. That day, I never told anybody, what's this kid from New York City going to say? What am I going to do? And the guy who had shared with me, he lived on my floor. He saw me a few weeks later. He said, Jim, have you accepted Jesus? I said, I think I have. Why do you ask? He says, you haven't stopped smiling for weeks. Something happened to me on that day, being in the Lord's presence. This is something that often happens to Jews when they come to the Lord. They have an experience with Jesus Christ, because my home was so secular, we never learned negative things about Jesus. We were indifferent to Jesus. No good, no bad, nothing. Most Jewish homes speak negatively about Jesus, so it's hard for a Jew to come to Jesus because it's not a blank slate. They're trained against him. And but still he appeared to me. So you see this happens to many Jews and also to many Muslims. Muslims will often have dreams when they're coming to the Lord, and they'll see Jesus in a dream. Because, why does he do that with us? Because he knows we need a little bit more. He's very, very gracious. He gives us what we need. And that's how I came to know the Lord. And the young man said to me, I said, how can I keep this presence of the Lord, this sense? He said, I've talked to people who've drifted away from the Lord, never had any deep relationship going. And I asked them, do you read your Bible every day? And they say no. Then I asked other people who always seem to be excited about the Lord. I asked them, do they read their Bible every day? They said yes. I said, well, I can do that. And I started reading the Bible every day, and I've read the Bible every day for 40 years.
Well, our mission here at The Story is to pretty much speak to people who've walked a similar path, and so it's to inspire non-religious Houstonians to follow Jesus. One of the biggest obstacles that we come across with leading people down that path is are issues related to science and faith. So how to make sense of the world as we understand it, how to make sense of the things we heard in college from trusted professors about science and evolution and other things, and how those things supposedly contradict the Bible. You, Dr. Chor, have said many times, I've heard on YouTube videos and elsewhere, that you've said that there is no contradiction to speak of at all, that the Bible and scientific facts are 100% compatible.
I see no controversy between the Bible and what scientific facts are. None. And so when I read the scriptures, I just love it. And when I see biological systems like you guys, biological systems, I mean, it's just amazing. Just amazing what God has made. Try to make one of these. Try to do that. I mean, you see everybody's building robotics. They're made out of plastic and metal and wires and semiconductors. They never make it out of biological systems. They always say they understand biology, everything about it, but they'll never try to make one of us. Never. Why? It's very, very hard to do with biology. What God has done is utterly fascinating. So there's many things that are touted as scientific facts, but are really theories. And so that's the real problem, that professors themselves are confused. I don't think professors, there are some professors that go in there to try to bother Christians. There's others that themselves, they are confused about what is fact and what is a theory. And so many facts have changed, you see that they are not facts, they are theories. The slow progression of changes within an evolutionary process that was proposed by Charles Darwin was totally turned over in 1972 by Eldridge and Gould. Punctuated equilibrium is what the fossil record shows. So they are suggesting that you have very little change, and then all of a sudden in a short time period, you have a massive change, and then again, very little change. That totally turned over Darwin, and they even come out against Darwinian theory, and that's science. I mean, and the age of the universe. Through the 1950s, the prevailing scientific view was that the universe has always been, didn't have a beginning. But then in 1964, it was proven through microwave background radiation, the universe had a definite beginning 13.8 billion years ago. A definite beginning, which is right in line with the Bible. But there is, again, a scientific quote-unquote fact that changed.
To rooms full of scientists, you will say, I do not understand evolution. And that's a gutsy thing for a man with your reputation to say. I feel like there's got to be something to lose for you there. As you've stood up and said these things, have you felt like you've lost something in the eyes of your colleagues?
Whatever I have lost is trinkets compared to what I have gained in Jesus Christ and compared to the men that have gone before me. The Bible even says in Hebrews, you have not yet shed blood for the gospel. And that's me. I mean, people have threatened to hit me. I want to shed some blood. That seems to be the threshold for persecution. Persecution these days is I wore a Christian t-shirt and somebody got offended. So I've been persecuted. This is what I've gone through isn't really persecution. It's silliness. You know, they don't let me in their societies. Groucho Marx really comforted me in this when he said, I don't want to be part of any society that would have me. And to think that those groups would be self-selecting, that would negate all of my accomplishments, which swamp the vast majority of people in those societies, because I don't agree with them on this, shows me that it's totally self-selecting, and it's really just a bunch of fluff. That's the only thing I've really sacrificed. Have people said things about me? Sure, behind my back, so I don't know it. To my face, it's very rare. Very rare to my face. And so most people are afraid. They really are. If you speak up a little bit about Jesus Christ, people will come against you at work and things. But if you speak up a lot, they leave you alone. They're afraid of you.
Okay, I've got a couple questions I want to get to you. This one comes from Emily, who says, how do you reconcile the way the world works according to science and the supernatural beliefs represented in the Bible, like resurrection?
Well, resurrection is a miracle. It means it doesn't happen every day. There's not a whole lot of cases of it, which tells us that it's really miraculous. So can science exclude the miraculous? No way. Science doesn't do that. Science doesn't answer that question. Not at all. It's not science's domain to answer the miraculous. Science is based on the observations that we can see. It's not there to explain the miraculous. So something is happening from outside. So this is outside the domain of science. I see absolutely no controversy. And that God, why should it amaze you, Paul said, that God should raise the dead? If he's God, he can raise the dead. He made us once. That's much harder to make us ab initio from a bunch of atoms and stitch us together to make us the first time. It's harder than raising the dead, because at least with the dead, you have all the pieces there already. And they're all in place. Raising the dead is easy compared to having a zygote that develops into a child and a human being, that this complex organism that's filled with a spirit, that's much harder than resurrection.
So how do you explain the origins and the seeming development or evolution of life on Earth, if not macroevolution or speciation or whatever? How do you explain how we got here?
Well, you've just covered a lot of science in that one sentence.
I don't really know what I'm talking about, so I just say words until you start talking.
You covered all of origin of life and evolution in this entire world in one sentence.
You're welcome.
You want me to explain the whole thing?
You have 2 minutes.
Origin of life, scientists are absolutely clueless. And I've written papers on this, and we are utterly clueless on origin of life. All experiments that have been put forth to explain this are a bunch of nonsense, and they know it. And as soon as you challenge them on it, they quietly go away. It happens every time. None of them will talk about the articles that I've written, because they know I'm calling them on it. So now I'm calling for a moratorium on the funding of origin of life research. That means a cessation, temporary cessation, until we can figure some things out to go after. Now, as far as evolution, which means that you already now have a living cell, and how do you go from a living cell to the complex organisms that you see today? That's evolution. Origin of life is from non-living materials, like HCN and acetone and formaldehyde and carbon dioxide, going to a living cell. As far as evolution, there's many theories on this, but we never have even an explanation of a single evolution of a complex system. Even a proposal of how that happens. In other words, how does one complex system change into another? How does one body plan change into another? We have no idea.
What do you think about, so there are different interpretations of what evolution means, right? So there's one species becoming another versus species changing within itself. Are you okay with what they would call microevolution within a species, or is that problematic for you as well?
No, microevolution we see all the time. We see that all the time in the lab. You can do that sort of thing. Small changes within a species happens all the time. This is no problem. And nobody has a problem with that. You see this all the time. It is large, specific changes. It's where you have one complex system going to another complex system. I don't even like to say speciation change, because you do see that in plants. For some unknown reason, sometimes plants will just double their genome. So now you have a new species. So I don't even like to say that you can't have a new species. Christians write that all the time. It's not really accurate, so I have to be careful what I say. You can have these doubling of genomes for some unexplained reason, but you never see changes, mechanisms, you never see changes of a complex system. So what they'll always throw at you is the immune system. Well, the immune system changes dynamically within the immune system depending on what it's presented with. That's how we battle these organisms that keep trying to attack us. But my argument is, I look at all the data. First of all, you can't even show the mechanism within that, how it's happening. But that mechanism, that immune system never becomes a digestive system or an auditory system or a visual system or a propulsion system or a skeletal system. It stays the system that it is. You don't even see the changes within that. And I say, you don't even have to show me the change. How do you propose it would happen? Show me the mechanism of a proposal. You never get it.
So I wanted to ask you one more question, Dr. Chor, before we get to everyone else's questions. What do you think the folks in your field and people that would argue with this on the things that you say, what are they protecting? If they don't have real facts or data to back them up, what narrative are they trying to protect and why? I've heard you say to students to beware of professors and not take their teachings at face value necessarily, but to research and study and seek truth. What do you think some professors are holding on to?
I think most professors don't know what they're talking about. They themselves are deluded. They themselves are not clear when they make a projection beyond what they have in hand, because they themselves have been taught this and think this. But when you pin them down, they don't know. What I'm quoting to students is out of Deuteronomy chapter 13, and I say it's like the false prophet. He says, God is going to allow false prophets to come, to test you, to see if you really love him and hold fast to him. Why would God allow a false prophet to come to Israel? Why doesn't he just keep them away? He says, I allow them to come to test you. When you're sitting in your classes, you're going to be tested. You're going to be tested in life. And God allows it to see if you really love him. Do you really love him? Do you really stand with God and stand upon his word? Or does one man or one woman say one little word to you and you give it up? You give it up. Everything that has been done for you in your life, you give it up. Because somebody said a comment? Are we going to believe God for who he is? This is the God who created the heavens and earth, who promised and gave promises of Israel and said that they would come back to that land. And in 1948, the lifetime of many of the people here, they come back to that land. And they're speaking the same language after being gone for 2,000 years. This Bible is true. Every word in it is true. Will we believe him? These are false prophets of our age. And we just fall. Oh, he said it. Go into their homes and see. Is this what you want to be like? You want to be like them? Hold fast to the Lord. His word is true.
Yes, sir, right here. Would you start with just telling us your name? And
My name is Lee Page. I am a geologist, so I have a lot of questions for you. Why is it that you cannot have the belief in science and the belief in the Bible by not taking the Bible quite so literally? I believe in God. I believe that the Bible is a metaphor. I do believe that the two are compatible that way because, at the end of the Permian, 95% of life on this planet as we know it was exterminated by whatever event, volcanism, meteorites. And then evolution took place and there was an explosion in different species. So some mechanism has to occur. Your assertion that nobody has seen that mechanism, I would say that that's because it takes millions and millions and millions of years to happen. And as human beings with 80 years of lifespan, we don't get to see that.
I understand what you're getting at. If I look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, something happened there. Because it tells us in the prophet Isaiah and the prophet Ezekiel that God created the world beautiful. Something happened in verse 2 where it became formless and void. There is a period there. We don't know what that period was or how long it was. Before, and then every account, everything of God created, there's God created in verse 1. This creation of ex nihilo, creation, is in verse 1, and only 2 other times. So it was God exposed, God showed forth, and the light showed forth, the sun showed forth. They were already there, they showed forth. The only things that he ultimately later on created were the animals and humans. Everything else, it said they bore forth. So I think that there's a lot in Genesis chapter 2 that allows us, that tells us that we don't know what happened in that time period, nor how long it is, that time period. What we do know is that God began to speak of this new creation event where he is exposing things. So the sun bore forth. There was light, and then there was the sun. So in other words, I was in India recently, and I was in Pune for a week. I never saw the sun. I never saw the sun. There was always a haze. There was so much smog, I never saw the sun. But the sun was there. So in other words, there was light, but there was no sun. So in other words, there were things that were clearing away from the environment that are not that much different. Now, I understand there's certainly allegorical things in the Bible, and I will be the first to confess that. So Psalm 104 says, the earth is set upon its pillars, and it is fixed. Now, I don't know how many people here believe that the earth is fixed and everything revolves around the earth. But I think that we most of us would agree that the earth revolves around the sun. There's another verse that says the sun rises and the sun sets. Well, actually what it is the sun is staying fixed and we're moving around it. Jesus said, I am the door. So yes, there are metaphorical verses in the Bible. I have no problem with that.
Anyone else have a question in the house tonight? Dr. Rotrock is right behind you here. Hi, Kelton.
Hello there. Thanks for coming tonight. Just maybe an elemental question here. Do you think that Adam was an actual person, or does Adam mean all men?
So in the Hebrew, that is man, but you read the book of Genesis, it certainly seems like an actual person. And then we have testimony in the New Testament that refers to him as if he were an actual person. And we've just learned in 2018, this year, so the so-called scientific fact was that a single breeding pair, meaning an Adam and an Eve, their genetic information of a single breeding pair could not account for the diversity of genetic information that you have in human beings. Until this year. So that fact has been kind of shaken up now this year, that a single breeding pair could account for the diversity, and in fact, in under 10,000 years, and even as low as 6,000 years, 2 people could have accounted if you have within that line occasional breeding into that line with other humanoid creatures. Well, what's a humanoid creature? Like a Neanderthal would be a humanoid creature. And you say, well, would a human being have relations with a Neanderthal? I'm telling you, human beings have relations with animals that aren't humanoid all the time, today. So human sexual behavior never amazes me at all.
All right. John, why don't you go ahead and then we'll get over here.
Thanks, Eric. Dr. Tour, thanks so much for coming. I really appreciate it. I've heard you speak before, and I'm listening to some of your talks. So I have a question. A book I read about 5 years ago, which was really impactful to me, was by Francis Collins, The Language of God, which I thought was terrific, and it helped, at least for me, put some of the evolutionary conundrum into perspective. And of course, he's a very bright man like you. Is there anything that you would significantly disagree with on his approach to what I would call the evolutionary conundrum, so to speak?
Yes, I disagree a lot with him. Francis, I consider him a friend, and I think he'd consider me a friend. Francis is a theistic evolutionist, and I like theistic evolutionists. They're fine people. And I've asked Francis, I said, Francis, I don't see the mechanism for the change. And he said, Jim, this is well worked out. I said, I just don't see it. I said, share it with me. He said, I'll send you a few articles. And Francis, being being the upright person and honest man that he is, he sent me 2 articles. There was not a single molecule in those articles. It was a bunch of fish heads. That doesn't show me mechanism. Mechanism shows the molecular transformation for change. And I told him, I said, Francis, I don't see the mechanism of change. And so I'm not a theistic evolutionist. Theistic evolutionists would be God set evolution in motion, and then evolution occurred. And we have a common ancestor in the chimpanzee. Then, I've lectured on junk DNA, which is now called intergenic DNA, and that's where you see the vast differences between human beings and chimpanzees. So I'm not a theistic evolutionist. I don't see the change. That book has done a lot for many people like yourself, and that's fine. I am never here to try to convert anybody. The only conversion I want is I want people to bow their knee to Jesus Christ. I'm not trying to convert people from their positions. For me, it really looks like there is no explanation from an evolutionary standpoint. And the biblical view can just be God spoke it and it happened. Although you can read Genesis and it says, and they bore forth after their kind. So you could read theistic evolution into that. And I'll concede that. And that's what I concede when I teach on the book of Genesis. And then I say, and here's other things that are not okay. Adam names all the animals, and this is all in a single day. Well, you try to name every animal in a single day, you're going to have a lot of trouble. In fact, people have calculated how long it would take, even if you could do, one every few seconds and name these things. So either Adam had this amazing mind, but it's very hard to do these sort of things if you say that day was 24 hours. Then you go back to the word yom in Hebrew. Yom can mean a long period. Now, it was never meant to be billions of years. But every time Yom was put with a number, it actually refers in the Bible to a 24-hour day. So I show both views on this. And there's Gerald Schroeder's view where when you have an expanding universe, which clearly we have, the universe is expanding, then when we look back in time, what looked to them like a short amount of time looks to us like a long amount of time because time is relative to where you are in the expansion of the universe. So there's lots of good theories out there. None of those bother me a bit. I don't know which one's right, which one's wrong, but I love the Word of God. It is my life. Moses said, this word that I have taught you, this is your life. And that's what it is for me.
Thank you, Dr. Tour.
It's like a Christopher Nolan movie there for a second. It's like, whoa, a total mind trip. That was awesome. Chester Posey over here. Chester, you have a question for us today, buddy.
So when you were talking with those people and you asked them what evidence they had for evolution and they couldn't give it to you, then what do they say to people they're giving speeches to?
Okay, so if I understand, you mean like when they're teaching their classes, how do they teach their classes if they don't have the evidence? Is that what you're saying? No, that's a very good question. I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they do it. They say this is how it happened, and in my opinion, what evolution is, it is storytelling. They are great storytellers. But when you ask them, show me how this happened. So what evolution is, it starts with origin of life, and some molecules come together in this little cartoon in this pond, and you start seeing a cell moving around, and then there's just a slithering creature comes walking out of a pond, and that's origin of life to evolution coming out of a pond, and that's what's in your book at school probably. And there is absolutely no basis for this. And there is storytelling. So neither is there chemistry behind it, nor is there mathematics. The mathematicians have buried these folks mathematically. They showed how hard it is to come up with their evolutionary models. The infinitesimal numbers of probabilities, again and again and again and again, would have to happen. So they say, well, mathematicians don't understand biology. Well, then you ask for the chemistry. Show me the chemistry. It's not there. You say, well, how does this happen? And you get stories. And then you present them with a totally opposite view. They'll tell you a story for that. It is storytelling.
Thank you, Chester. Sleep well at night, buddy. All right. Tell us your name, please.
Hi. Hi, I'm Jackie. I'm actually a Rice student also, and I just want to first thank you for your time, but also just for the presence that you are on campus and just the positive impact that I know that you've had on so many students that I've talked to personally and just indirectly too. But my question is, going back to a more practical aspect, I mean, obviously we always want to be really like bold in our faith, but I think especially when we feel like we don't always have all the answers, especially like scientific answers, we tend to be shyer. So I just wanted to know if you have any like advice on how to be less shy about that and how to like actually confront things and question things when like people make assumptions about like the validity or like invalidity of faith.
Blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely on account of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. This is why we need people who love the Lord going into the academy and becoming professors, because one little man can have a huge effect. It changes the conversation on campus. It changes the dynamic on campus because conversations that are against the Lord stop when you have somebody who is willing and bold to stand up and testify. We need more professors. There are very few professors that are believers on campus that are willing to speak up.
Folks, can we thank Dr. Tour for being with us tonight?
So, Maybe God listeners, what do you think? Whether you agree with Dr. Tour or not, please email us your thoughts and questions to maybegodpod@gmail.com. We'll be talking about evolution in another episode soon and want you to be a part of the conversation. Thanks for listening.
Maybe God is produced by Julie Mueller-Courtois. Our associate producer is Brandon Duke. Aubrey Snyder and Patrick Lowry are the audio engineers, and Brittany Holland is our amazing editor. Our theme song is by Nathan Bonus. Starting December 1st, check us out online at maybegodpod.com.